The goal of a blockchain is to continue producing blocks that represent different transactions, and as those blocks get proposed, the rest of the network gets to vote and approve of those blocks, meaning that we all agree that that is a good block to continue building the blockchain on. And we know that it takes a 2/3 majority, supermajority technically, on the Solana network in order to approve of the block. So a leader is going to propose a block, the network votes on that block, and assuming it gets approved, well, then we are able to then build the next block off of that. But this can actually technically still get reversed, even if it is unlikely. And in order to understand what we mean by that and the ability to maybe go back in time to another block, we have to understand the status of the blocks as they progress through this process. So for example, when a block is first proposed by a leader, it's going to start in the processed state. This simply means that a leader has created the block and is suggesting to the rest of the network that we vote on it. Now, the rest of the network is going to vote on it, and again, assuming we get that 2/3 supermajority here, we are going to place this block into the confirmed state. At this point, we all agree that this is a good block to keep building on, and the Solana network moves fast. We need to keep moving, and so at this point, we're good. We're going to start producing the next block based on this confirmed block, even though it's not yet in the final status. The final status is known as finalized. And at this point, it is absolutely permanent, as if it's locked into concrete. We are not going to ever be able to go back. But that's interesting because if we can't go back, if it's permanent at this state, well then what about this confirmed status? Again, is there a chance that we could go back in time? And if it's not locked in, then how do we continue to move forward as a network? Well, Solana is essentially building this out to have a short-term method of confirming our blocks, and then we also have a much longer-term method as well. And the reason for this is if we wait the long term for every single block, the network has to slow down and wait for that block to enter into a finalized state. And we don't want to wait. We want to keep moving. Solana is a fast network. And so having this shorter time frame allows the network to keep moving forward, even though the block isn't technically permanent. So how could it be that we go back in time? Well, as we keep going with this, I do just want to pause and say thank you very much for watching this content. If it helps, please give it a like, share it with a friend, and stake some soul on Lake Stake. We're grateful for every last Lamport. So now, if we know that we have a confirmed block and all of these blocks have been confirmed, again, we can continue to build new blocks off of this. But again, we need to understand what exactly it means to be in a confirmed status. And if we think back to the fact that our validators are going to build that tower file, which stacks up their last bunch of votes, we recall that a validator is actually able to use this rollback concept. Usually this means that the validator accidentally created its own fork, it voted on a bad block maybe, and it needs to roll back and realize that the rest of the network took this block and went a completely different direction. And so we need to undo our fork by implementing this rollback concept. Well, if a leader, or for that matter, if a bunch of validators on the Solana network decide to all roll back at once, well, then at that point, the entire network rolls back. But how exactly could this happen? Well, once again, this would require the rollback concept where we have a leader that proposes rolling back, and the supermajority of the network needs to agree upon this move. So technically speaking, we could have a bunch of blocks in this confirmed status, and then all of a sudden we go back in time, which is maybe arguably dangerous, but also not that big of a deal, and here's why. This would require an enormous move by the network. It would require 2/3, again, by stake. This is always by stake when we're voting at that 2/3 supermajority. But it would require 2/3 of the network to decide that, yes, we do want to roll back. And so unless the network actually gets taken over in some way by malicious actors who somehow commandeer 2/3 of the network, this is not going to be a concern because we have to assume in this case that somehow all of these honest validators are also deciding to roll back. And so we need to get to a point still where, you know what, I don't like any of this. So, is there a situation where we could have transactions approved by the network and everybody agrees that we're good to go, and then all of a sudden a validator suggests that we roll back in time to before all of those transactions happened? And at that point, would the Solana network follow? Well, technically this is possible. Remember the concept of rollback. Each validator has its own tower established, meaning it's tracking its previous votes, and we're able to go back in time as a validator if we need to. This is known as a rollback. And at this point, we can propose that we all roll back together. Because if we can roll back ourselves, then we could certainly, as a leader, suggest that we build a block off of this block rather than the most recent block. Now, normally a validator is going to roll back because it accidentally forked. It created all of these blocks by mistake, meaning that maybe we based it on a bad block, we voted on a block, it wasn't actually approved, and so we had to roll back and perform this rollback because the rest of the network went a totally different direction off of that base block back in time. But this concept of rollback can be used by the leader to say, hey, we're going to roll back in time and we're going to build a block off of a previous block that was long ago confirmed. And that's great and all, except keep in mind that 2/3 of the network, that supermajority by stake, it's always by stake when we're voting, must also agree. So how likely is it that we could roll back a bunch of transactions that people thought were completed? It's pretty unlikely. This would require some very sophisticated attack by a bunch of malicious actors in order to somehow commandeer 2/3 of the votes to approve of this major rollback. In standard network operation, this is basically impossible. And so it's important to recognize that even though in standard network operation, this is basically impossible, however, technically speaking, it could happen, which is why we need to enter a finalized state eventually. So when does the block get finalized and again become permanently part of the blockchain? Well, keep in mind that this tower tracks 32 votes, meaning that we can roll back by 32 blocks if we need to. Now, this would be a disaster to actually try to roll back 32 votes, especially if a validator needed to do it because they forked off and they need to go all the way back. That would require a very long lockout period, as we discussed in a previous video. But understand that this is the maximum rollback amount. So if we can only go back in time by 32 votes, that means that anything beyond 32 votes is going to be permanent. So if this is the block that we're proposing and we want to go back in time, we might find that this block right here is the 32nd block, meaning this is the furthest back we can go. And that creates a situation where these blocks have now entered the finalized state. And these blocks also become known as rooted blocks. They cannot be changed. They cannot ever be undone. Even if a supermajority of the network wanted to go back in time, it wouldn't be possible. Now, 32 slots only takes about 15 seconds on the Solana network. If we do the math at 400 milliseconds per slot, that would be about 12.8 seconds, but slot timers can vary. And so the question we have to ask if we're developing apps on the Solana network is, do we want to wait the full 15 seconds for our transactions to be considered finalized? If we're a slow-moving application, then we might as well wait the 15 seconds because from a human perspective, 15 seconds isn't that long. But But if we're a very fast-moving type of application, maybe we're trying to make trades on the network, then we have to decide between the risk of assuming a transaction that was confirmed is going to be permanent, which, again, should be the case, or truly, again, waiting that 15 seconds. So that is how blocks move from the processed to the confirmed and then to the finalized state. So if you found this video helpful, then please like it, subscribe to the channel, and always remember to stake at the lake.